politics, leadership, and athletics. And tonight's forum will not disappoint. I also want to warmly welcome Miss Brittany Packnett back to the Institute of Politics. Brittany was a resident fellow in the fall of 2018, and it's great to have you back in this incredible panel, which I will leave to you now. Thank you so much. Enjoy.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Peter Carfagna. You have the bios. I think in the handout, Tommy was kind enough with Casey's help to bring me in to moderate this amazing panel. And Clark, I got to start by saying I've been a fan of yours since my son played against you in high school and you kicked his butt.
Okay. No problem.
But anyway, welcome everybody. We want this to be a free and flowing discussion. We especially want to involve you guys who are playing for Tommy now, and we have a little theme and a little outline. And Brittany, you were kind enough to indulge my addiction to sports and bring this to bear. And Clark, we just want to start, as the title would indicate, by talking about, let's talk about the rights of the student athlete. You've had a son who just went through it. Let's talk about, how active they should be to be paid to play, or perhaps one and done. Let's get right down to it. Name, image, likeness rights. There's some California legislation that's now being proposed that's pretty far down the line. Why shouldn't these young men be allowed to brand their own name, image, likeness, and be heavily involved in that? What would be wrong with that? Would that destroy the amateurism model? Let's just go right into detail.
You're not wasting any time.
I'm going to ask all the questions at once.
That's the whole outline. I can throw it away now.
Yeah, you covered all the bases. Well, amateurism, from my standpoint, is certainly in need of refinement. I'm not quite ready to disband the whole notion of amateurism, particularly as it relates to student athletes and scholarships. Certainly there's room to modify what that model looks like. It's become a bit antiquated and bogged down in my estimation, but I don't ever want to dismiss the value of what student athletes gain from the experience of being on a college campus and getting an education. Never want to run roughshod over that particular aspect, because that experience has great value. There are tremendous benefits to being a scholarship student athlete. We've got 3 adult children now, but all 3 were Division I scholarship athletes in basketball, our 2 boys, and then our daughter in volleyball. And I can tell you that having an opportunity to get an education without having to pay for it because of your athletic ability is beneficial and positive. I also am not interested in seeing college athletics be professionalized. There's a difference between the college landscape and the pro landscape. That said, there is room for the economic pie, the business aspect of collegiate athletics, particularly in the revenue-generating sports, football and basketball, for there to be perhaps a different type of stewardship of those resources to benefit the student athlete.
Those that's very careful words.
I wanted to give you some room to fill in.
And we'll get right into it. Brittany, I mean, we talked about equal pay, the women's soccer team. We talked about Title IX. Look, if we were going to have branding, the women's varsity, all the varsity athletes ought to be able to brand their name, image, likeness. Whatever the market would bear, that's what they ought to be able to take home.
Yeah. I mean, I think that just because it's difficult to figure out the issue of equal pay doesn't mean that it's not worth doing, right? And I want to say, right, as a qualifier, I ran track in high school. I did not even letter in like Division III beer pong when I was in college, but I am an activist and am somebody who is am a fan of lots of different college sports. I find myself very fascinated by the fact that Taylor Branch is one of the country's foremost MLK scholars and is also one of the most profound voices against amateurism. Like, I just find that to be a fascinating combination of expertise, right? That a person who has spent their entire career looking at injustice, looking at inequities, looking at the mid-century civil rights movement from every angle you possibly can, is also interested in the inequities that are existed in the current system of amateurism, right? And so there are ins and outs that I don't fully understand, but I certainly think that at the very least, you're right, that we need to recognize that there's something broken about the system. If there weren't something broken about the system, people wouldn't be looking for loopholes around it all the time, right?
Yeah, no,
like we don't try to break the things that are already perfect, right?
If you haven't seen it, he's been to my class. I hope some of my students hear extra credit if you're here from the law school, but the school, the price of college sports, you've got to look at it. It's really, really, really good.
It's fascinating, and I've watched it a couple of times because I'm just so interested in the impossible positions we place so many young people in. And you know, the value of an education is something that we cannot deny. I'm a former teacher. I can't seem to stay away from the IOP. Clearly, I appreciate and I value education, but we have to have a reckoning about how valuable higher education currently is to the students that are in seats every single day. Here's why I say that. Right now, research tells us that if you were to close the college graduation gap across the country, that the wealth gap would close for Black and Latino students by literally less than 10% for each group. Right? So what that means is that the value of education is not currently at a place where it's providing the kind of equitable outcomes that all young people deserve. So then you have a conversation about amateurism and whether or not somebody should be able to jump straight to the league or whether they should be able to be paid in college and whether or not we can make sure that that money is balanced out across all the sports and all of the genders. And I recognize the very difficult situation we put someone in when we're saying, here's your once in a lifetime opportunity to not only take your family out of poverty, but prevent future generations of your family from enduring the sin of poverty. Or you can come over here and potentially risk your ability and your earning potential in the long run. And this education we're giving you isn't going to close the wealth gap for you, right? So that is both a question of amateurism and the quality of the schools that we're putting.
No doubt about it. And also, I think when you talk about empowerment and moving forward, there are a number of levers to empowerment. Okay, access is one of those levers. Education is one. Economics is another. Equality is another. Exposure is another. Opportunity, justice, those are all levers on the road to empowerment. When you look at amateurism and the NCAA as currently constituted, are they exercising the right levers to give everybody that comes into the association as a student athlete an opportunity to maximize his or her pathways to success? Now, we talk about the small percentage of those who will have a chance to be pros. That's typically where the cauldron cry for pay for play comes into existence. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of more that will not have that opportunity. I think there should be multiple pathways, and that amateurism, or the model we call amateurism, has to be modified to actually be able to handle those different pathways and create different pathways for the super elite that will choose to attend college for a time, perhaps for 2 or 3 or 4 years. The one and done in college basketball is actually a collectively bargained rule in the NBA, where they will not draft players until they are a year removed from college, high school, and 19 years old. That was collectively bargained. On paper in 2006, when that was put into existence, it sounded and looked pretty good. Because from my perspective, as a former scholarship athlete, as one who had a chance to leave school early back in 1982 after my junior year, I thought some college would be better than none if you would be fully invested in the opportunity and experience there. And we know not everybody is so inclined. That said, as time has gone on, the one and done is not a good solution. Those who are uniquely gifted and or have the desire to move into their pro career, and I'm speaking basketball specifically on the men's side, after high school should have that option. If you choose to come to college, you should have the option to be there as long as you desire to be there. But if the opportunity to pursue a pro career comes after year 1 or 2, that should be available to you as well. You should have the option to choose, and hopefully multiple pathways to give yourself a chance to pursue your dream. So I'm not a proponent of the one and done. At one time I was, but now I think we'd be better served to give those elite high-level prospects that desire to skip college that opportunity to do so, but that'll have to be something the NBA and the Players Association determine. And I don't know if they'll retroactively move it back to before the expiration of the current collective bargaining agreement or not, but I think we're headed in that direction.
Given that small percent, let me just interject so the young men and women who are here playing for the Harvard team, if you had the choice, if you really want to make a difference in their lives and they had a Division I scholarship, given the small percentage ever going to play professionally, make a living, would you say come to Harvard or take the Division I scholarship?
That question's for you.
That was for you, Brittany.
That's a softball for the team.
No, you know
Tommy.
what? And I always try to, it's really impossible to go back to the future, to try to think about things as if I was 17 or 18 years old again. You always are framed by where you currently are. But if I was advising a young person, if someone sought my advice, I would try to evaluate who they were and what their desires were, and then put the pros and cons of both situations in front of them and let them decide. Giving advice or dictating is not for me to do for someone else, but presenting options and sides of the coin to evaluate would be the posture I would take.
I do want to make sure I get to your equal pay question here, because for me this is really about an organizing principle or an educational principle. So when I was teaching 3rd grade in Southeast DC, one of the first things I learned when I became a teacher was that students will rise to the level of expectation that you set. If you set low expectations, that's what they will rise to. If you set high expectations, that's what they will rise to. That is also an organizing principle, right? Because there are so many things that we have organized for and activated folks for that people say is impossible. Right? That you don't need to set. So when we co-founded Campaign Zero, I tell people all the time, we didn't call it Campaign Less or Campaign Fewer. We believe we can live in a world where the police do not kill people. Campaign Zero. Period. End of story. People tell us all the time that is an impossible aspiration. What I respond to them with is, it's not an aspiration, it's actually my expectation, right, for the country I live in. Similarly, if the expectation is set that athletes of all gender identities receive equitable pay, then the question is not, well, here are all the reasons why we can't do it. Then the question is, let's figure out how we can do it, right? Because we have to rise to the level of expectation that we set. So I feel like we've been having the wrong conversation in society about this, because we keep starting with all the reasons why it's impossible instead of saying, if the expectation is gender parity, if the expectation is equity, then how do we collectively get creative and rise to the occasion?
Absolutely. Well, I'm proudly the chair of the board of the LPGA, having worked in the golf world my whole life, and we're working on that topic even as we speak. So I'm with you 100%. But let's just go back real quick and talk about leveraging the brand, if we could, and using your athletic brand to create change. And we go back, we're talking about the Muhammad Ali's of the world, the Jim Browns of the world, all the names we mentioned in our prep session. I mean, is that an appropriate use of your brand once it's been developed, to leverage it to make political and economic and social change?
I don't think there's any question. We're all required to make a difference and to influence others for good, whatever our platform is. Our brand is tied to who we are from the inside out. Our character, what we represent, what we stand for, and that brand is to be developed daily and over time. And if it happens to be in the world of athletics, then so be it. But whatever your individual personal brand is, it should be cultivated and developed to influence for good. And in the world of athletics, clearly, where you have more visibility, more opportunity, more exposure, I think there's a little more responsibility to go beyond your immediate sphere of influence and to leverage whatever your influence is for the greatest good in whatever way you choose. Now, it's not going to be the same for everybody. Athletes in general have platforms that are unique, that are more visible, that have more influence in general. But the individuals within that athletic sphere should find ways to be true to themselves while leveraging their brand for positive influence. And that's what I would hope the young people here would grab hold of, is that you have a brand. Your brand is always being either varnished or tarnished based on how you conduct yourself, how you handle the business at hand, how you perform as a student athlete, how you interact with your professors and those in your community and your teammates. Your brand is always being developed. And when you have a brand, you should use it for good, for influence. And leveraging that influence, to me, is really what brand building is. Build your brand on solid foundations of character, integrity, trustworthiness, excellence, or the pursuit of excellence. And then as you build that, leverage it for good in your sphere of influence. And depending on who you are, where you are, that influence sphere is a little different, but we're all required to leverage it for good, in my estimation.
And Brittany, to go so far, as we talked about in our prep session, Kaepernick essentially being colluded out of the league. But he wasn't going to take it anymore.
He was not going to take it anymore. Neither was Antonio Brown. This is another conversation.
Antonio Brown? Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because when I think about the legacy of the athlete activist, we've seen an evolution. I think about somebody like Paul Robeson, who had to present in a particular way in order to be effective. So he's clearly an incredibly talented athlete, but he's also a very gifted scholar. And there is a respectability to him that allows him to maneuver and navigate spaces that other black folks who were saying the exact same things about equity and freedom as him could not say and communicate to people that whose respect he had won, right? And so then we kind of fast forward into the Ali era, and we see someone who says, okay, so if Paul Robeson had to work within the system, I'm going to break the system, right? And I'm going to take this thing all the way to the Supreme Court because I have broke it wide open. And I'm not going to surrender. I'm not going to stop, even though you've taken every opportunity I have to earn any income at the thing that I'm good at. I'm still willing to break the system open, right? This is the tradition that Colin Kaepernick stands in. And I think what's really powerful about right now is that we've got so many different models of what athlete activism can look like. So you've got Colin Kaepernick, who makes absolute sacrifices and is still investing in his communities with what he has, right? So I'm not making this NFL paycheck anymore, but I'm still going to set up Know Your Rights camps. I'm still going to be giving away most of the wealth that I do have, right? And I'm still going to be requiring that any company that comes to work with me, like Nike, does so in a fashion that reflects my values, right? There's also like the LeBron model that I absolutely love. So we have Robeson working within the system, Ali breaking it wide open, and LeBron saying, I don't have to worry about breaking your system or working within it because I'm just gonna own it myself, right? So you see him coming out in that I Can't Breathe shirt, and there's a level of risk that didn't exist for LeBron, not just because he's arguably the greatest, but also because he had set up so many different spaces in which he excelled, in which he exhibited ownership, in which he exhibited great influence, that there wasn't that much that they could really take away from him, right? So the contract goes and he's still got the film entities. The contract goes and he's still got the school, right? So there are so many ways in which we see people operating in the evolved tradition of athlete activism. I think what's powerful now is, to your point, when you're an athlete and you decide to take on that responsibility, you've got so many options and models to look at, and you can say, how do I continue to evolve what I'm seeing in front of me?
And for our young folks here, they too have those models to look at in terms of navigating their own brand journeys and leveraging their influence in the spheres that they're in. That's a fabulous point in regards to the vast number of examples and different looks as to what that can mean and be in terms of leveraging your brand where you are.
But Clark, counterpoint, Charles Barkley famously said, "I'm not a role model. I don't have to be a role model."
That's one of my favorite colleagues.
Right.
He helicopters in for 3 weeks in March, and we have a good time talking about basketball and other things. But that point, and I think he was a little misunderstood there. I really do. Clearly, I can understand some of the criticism, but his point at that particular juncture, as I recall, it was simply that the ultimate role models are those closest to the kids that are looking up. In other words, parents, extended family. He hadn't quite captured the essence of his platform being part of a responsibility to be a role model. And I think he was more calling out the fact that real, genuine role models are those who are closest to those they influence. Parents, extended family, and so forth. Now, there's two sides to that coin, and I understand the other side of it, but that was my interpretation there. And since then, his journey has been okay and his stardom has been phenomenal, and his entertainment value is unquestioned, but he's got a heart where he actually is an owner as well of a production company and doing some things in regards to making statements and so forth. So again, to your point, I think there's a responsibility we all have to be an example for those that are going to come behind us and those that are looking at us for how we navigate our influence and our opportunities for influence.
Yeah, I do think that there's to extend your point, not to debate it, there's a real understanding that we have to have in the fact that most of the folks we're talking about have at least one marginalized identity. Right, we're talking about black men, we're talking about women, we're talking about LGBTQ folks, right? I think about the entirety of U.S. women's soccer and all of the many stances that they have taken and put themselves on the line. In some ways, maybe some of them felt like they had even less to risk because it was like people weren't necessarily talking about them in the same ways in previous months. But there's a responsibility that we all have, but I think that there's a clear ownership of that responsibility, especially when you have a marginalized identity. And I think so often about the fact that somebody broke into LeBron's house, right? And spray painted a racial slur, and that the millions of dollars and all of the greatest of all time lists that you're on, and there's no amount of ESPN appearances that can save you from the scourge of racism. There is no amount of access and opportunity that can save you from sexism until we actually end those things, right? So I think that there's, in addition to what you're saying, there's a real recognition from those of us who possess marginalized identities. I can't divorce myself from the struggle because the struggle will never divorce itself from me.
Well, I resonate. I was telling you in the prep session about Muhammad Ali when I was here at Harvard, and I was a class officer, and we invited him. He was our class day speaker, and I was the one who welcomed him off the plane. Then when I was at IMG as general counsel, we represented greatest of all time as licensing company. And I think what he went through was just one of those unbelievable experiences that, that just transcended sport, because out of the game for all those years, right at the pinnacle of his career, but he's willing to make that sacrifice, So, we're building a firm foundation here. Let's just keep going back and forth in the few minutes that remain before we're going to get to the Q&A, and be a little lighter touch. Like, did he really beat you at the game of horse? Did President Obama really beat you, Clark?
Okay, clearly he's not talking to me.
I can't dodge that one. Well, it's out there on YouTube for everybody to see. President Barack Obama and I had a nice game of POTUS back in 2010. I was interested in making it good television, so instead of beating him 5 letters to none, I jumped out early 3 letters to none, and then had compassion. Had compassion for our president. Well, there's always 2 sides to the story. So I had compassion and missed a couple on purpose. And as those of us in sports know, whether you're a fan or a participant, when momentum shifts, you can't recapture it. I thought I was going to still be able to make it entertaining and win, but the president had other ideas. And he let me know about it as he was spraying jumpers. Wow. Wow. So So he came up on top by one letter, and quite honestly, I think it made for better television. Although I will tell you this, some of my peers, fellow competitors, still look at me with disdain. How did you let him win? I said, for the good of the greater good. And I can handle it. I can handle it.
They call it the highest court in the land, right?
Still one of the greatest experiences I've ever had through the gift of basketball. To interact with a sitting president, the first African-American president, through the gift of basketball in my life. And it's still one of my greatest memories in the game is to have that interaction. And I have multiple others with President Barack Obama around basketball, which was beyond anything I could have ever dreamed of.
But Brittany, let me finish. You got like 2 minutes before Q&A. So I want to nominate Clark to be next governor of the state of Ohio. So is the ultimate impact to do what President Obama did, and that is to go into politics, leverage your athletic brand to go ahead and change the world like President Obama has and continues to?
I'm fine with you being governor. I just want to say that.
Oh, well.
Person out now. I think, again, to this idea of so many models, there are so many pathways to change. Yeah. I actually think sometimes we over-index, and I know the irony of saying this in the middle of the JFK Forum at the Institute of Politics, sometimes we over-index on you being the person to run for office, right? That there are, I've gotten over I did a lot of work with the Obama White House as well, and one of the people I've gotten to know who's become a mentor, like an aunt almost, is Valerie Jarrett, who has never run for anybody's office and still one of the most powerful women in the entire country, right? And the way in which the White House opened up to the people had so much to do with her being able to execute the Obama's vision on that, and her having the relationships and credibility to do that, and never put her name on a ballot, right? So many of the advances we've seen on LGBTQ parity and women's parity, that all came from out of her office and under her leadership, and she never put her name on the ballot. So I think that sometimes we get so excited when we see somebody smart and we're like, you should run for office, you should run for office, you should run for office. Well, whoever runs for office needs a bomb chief of staff. Yes. They need fantastic political directors. They also need organizers in their communities that will push them on the things they need to be pushed on and give them cover where they need with their colleagues, right? They also need great faith leaders who are going to be able to organize those communities. They also need fantastic educators to make sure that the populace in their districts are actually informed, right? So I just think that we can never limit ourselves to the way that change is made, but whatever you go and do, make sure that you are actually moving the needle.
Can I stop and just say amen? Amen and amen. Sure. Because you're talking about using what you have and recognizing there are multiple pathways to trying to get to the higher ground.
That's right.
And you're right. We so often tend to index or focus on the visible and the upfront when in fact it takes everybody doing their part in their space. Right. So well said. Appreciate
and we need folks to do their part, like I said, in ways that really move the needle.
Yeah, right.
I think that when I came last year to be a fellow, one of the things that struck me about Harvard students is that you all have your whole lives planned out. You were like, so when I graduate, I'm going to go work on this campaign, and then after a year and a half, I'm going to get this job, and I'm going to work here, and I'm going to make this amount of money. I'm slightly older than you, only slightly. And I'm here to tell you that none of it works that way. And sometimes we get so focused on the attainment that we forget about the impact that we're actually trying to have. So when people ask me for career advice, I ask them, what do you want to be true in the world because you are here? What do you want to be true in the world because you are here? I'm not asking you how much money you want to make, at what age, and where you want to live, and what you want your title to be. I'm asking you what you want your impact to be. And there are a lot of people who get the titles and don't have an impact. Don't be one of those folks.
Yeah. Well, let me ask Clark, and we're a little over, but so is your work as, I think, the best basketball commentator? I'm just saying.
There's a lot of flavors out there.
Yeah,
I'm just glad to be one of them.
You've got the best one-liners. I mean, not even a close second. Is that as important, more important as your work on the Board of Trustees for Ohio State? And thank you for that, fellow Buckeye.
I appreciate the opportunity. Heart to heart. To me, basketball was a gift from God in terms of ability, aptitude, size, things that I necessarily didn't have anything to do with other than to make use of them in good order. So I look at the game as a gift that has afforded me opportunities to go in different directions. The service on the board of trustees of my alma mater was one of the great privileges that I've ever had in my life, and it taught me an awful lot, and I hope to use that to benefit others going forward. But I have always viewed life as stewardship, and everything that comes into my life is to be stewarded well, to honor God and to serve others. So the work that I've been afforded and given the chance to do as a commentator has been wonderful for me. It's kept me close to the game. It's given me another career path after playing, but service and having an impact on others in a positive way, starting with those that have been entrusted to my care under my own roof, my wife and our children and granddaughters, and then trying to serve other folks. So anything I do or whatever my job happens to be is just an extension of that permeating theme of stewardship and seeking to use what God's given me to serve others in a way that makes a difference.
Wow. Can I just ask one last question real quick? The point you touched on, Brittany, for our student athletes who are here, the holistic approach, what we talked about in our prep session, even when you work with the Pacers, you see more mental health, holistic approach to the student athlete and the professional athlete. I think that you're getting to that point too, that you don't want to be too pigeonholed too soon, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
absolutely.
you just want to elaborate on that.
And I do think, we've been talking all day actually in some form or fashion about wellness. Audrey Lord, who is she would call herself a lesbian warrior poet and thinker. She said two really important things. She said lots of important things, but two that are relevant here. One is she was giving the commencement address in 1989 at Oberlin College, and she said that the gravest error of privilege is to absorb without use. The gravest error of privilege is to absorb without use. And this is exactly what you're talking about. She's talking about stewarding our own privilege and all of the many privileges that we all have, right? That we have a responsibility to steward those things, to spend that privilege and not simply to absorb it. One of the other things she said, though, was that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And it is one of my favorite quotes because we have forgive the term, but bastardized self-care, right? Like self-care went from being a serious conversation in marginalized communities and activist communities to make sure that folks could survive and get beyond surviving to thrive. Now self-care is like, buy this product, go to this spa, right? Go on this very expensive vacation. And suddenly self-care is out of reach for the very people who need it most. The fact of the matter is, though, that quote and that thinking from her helps us reframe why self-care is necessary, because so many of you buck traditional systems, right? The mere idea of a female athlete at an elite institution performing at an elite level is in direct contrast to a status quo that was established for a very long time, right? So your existence in so many ways on that court every single day is a form of resistance. And if you are not well, you cannot engage in that resistance, right? If you are not well, you cannot break the systems in the way that Ali did. And I've seen so many of my peers and my elders who have engaged in social change from whatever perspective and in whatever way they choose to, just be beaten down by life in a way that it's very difficult to sustain the work, right? They're broke, they're ill, right? They're like, their mental health isn't well, their physical health isn't well. And the first time I ever went to the Oval Office with President Obama, we talked about one of the quotes on his carpet from Dr. King, where the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I thought he was going to be like, it's important that we take our arms and that we bend it, which is true. But what he said is, he's like, it's long. Yeah, right. So we need you to be here to do the work. Yeah. And so I just don't think we can underestimate the importance of holistic wellness at all times. Right? You are elite athletes, therefore your bodies are trained well, but are your minds okay, right? Is your heart okay? Is your spirit okay? Because all of these things are operating in concert with one another, and you can't be here to teach us a new way if you're not caring for yourself.
Amen.
And Clark, all those years with the Pacers, is that good business too? Or is it just the holistic approach, the way that the NBA should go, the way the coaches should go here with these student athletes?
Well, I think it's universal. I don't think there's any discrimination or discrepancy. I mean, that interconnection of wholeness and wellness has impact in whatever arena you're in, whatever arena. And the more it's integrated as part of how you become whole, mind, body, soul, heart, head, body, however you want to frame it, it's important that those resources begin to be part of the integrated approach to being well in every area. And that's happening. Quite honestly, I'm seeing a little more of it, Peter, on the college landscape.
Yep.
I'm seeing a little more of it in the professional game because stories have been shared about the resources available in the behavioral health, the mental health space, and what that can look like and what that can mean for longevity, endurance, stamina, and effectiveness in whatever you're doing. And obviously, high-level performing athletes get a lot of attention, but it's beneficial for all of us, no matter where we are.
Like Kevin Love, being a Cavs fan, coming out admitting he had those issues.
Stories are powerful. Testimonies are powerful. They're great examples and give affirmation. They give confirmation. They give encouragement. And we all have a responsibility, as we're able, to share ours. For the benefit, for our own benefit, but also for the benefit of others.
Okay, I'm getting the high sign, right? Time. First to go. It's all yours.
Microphone on? Yeah. Okay, Professor Brittany Clark. I'm Jack Drury, Buckeye through and through. Shaker 67.
All right.
Harvard College here 71. And by way of full disclosure, I've written a few articles for the Philadelphia Tribune and the Boston Bay State Banner recently. What I wanted to ask you, here we are in Boston, all the things going on around the world, but what were the first stories the last 2 days on the news? Antonio Brown coming to the Patriots, David Ortiz throwing out the first pitch at Fenway. Wherever you looked, that was the first story. So what would you say is the significance of that fact?
Wow. Well, on the Antonio Brown, I guess you could look at it in multiple ways. One is the success of the Patriots is news whenever they do something. So that generates headlines and attention. And then obviously his antics and actions tend to skew towards what captures eyeballs in terms of how the media responds, no matter how outrageous or crazy it might seem. So I think that's one way to look at those two. David Ortiz, obviously, to see him recover from being shot, I tend to try to skew to the positive at all times and in all circumstances. It does cast a light on the power of sports. And that power can cut both ways. That attention can cut both ways. And in this case, perhaps it's in light of all else that goes on in the world of significance, it probably should have a little more diminished profile. But the power of sports is real. And so I tend to skew towards the positive side of David Ortiz, what he represented as a player here, how he's recovered, and what that means, not only for him, but it's a great example of perseverance on the one hand.
I don't necessarily know that it should be diminished. To be clear, the closest I've ever gotten to the Patriots was having better seats than Tom Brady at Hamilton last fall.
Well, diminished may have been the wrong word.
That
Maybe
counts,
diminished.
That counts for a lot.
I mean, we were like 2 rows in front of them. I was like, these are really good seats. It's fascinating because there are so many conversations that America was not ready to have until the sports world had it for them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the same power of Hollywood, right? I mean, you want to talk about integration, right? Somebody black and somebody white kissed on screen, suddenly everybody has to talk about integration, right? Brand Tricky makes a decision about Jackie Robinson, suddenly everybody has to have this conversation. So the power of sport, I think, can introduce concepts, mindsets, ideas, conversations into society that people are not ready for, or that people are having quietly and suddenly they're able to have out in the open. Yeah. So you get a reaction like shut up and dribble. Black activists the entire time had been talking about how many people were telling us to stay in our place. But now the entire country is having a conversation about this, and we're finally in a position to lay bare some truths because of the power of sport.
Great point. Yeah.
Good. Yes? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kellogg and Ms. Packett, for being here. It's an honor. My name is Anan Hafez. I'm a sophomore at the college, and my question is to the athletes who aren't LeBron James, who aren't all-stars, but who want to get politically involved, who want to take a knee, who want to be political activists. What would your advice be to them if they're afraid of sacrificing their career, of losing their earnings, of not being able to support their family?
At the pro level, we're talking?
At the pro level.
Thank you. Good question.
Oh, you want me?
I've never been a pro athlete. So.
Well, I would say this. I think anytime you're going to engage in activism, that you have to do it from a place of great conviction. It can't be circumstantial. It can be, but it has to be driven from a deeper place. And there has to be a real commitment to being informed and then to counting the cost. I think that's really what you have to look at. What is it that you're looking to try to change? What will it cost? Be eyes wide open, and then stand by your convictions as you're informed about what you're going to step into. And then you have to have the courage if it's going to be painful or difficult, and you need folks around you that can help you. But my advice would simply be to operate from conviction. There's a lot of talk about activism, and it's good talk, it's healthy talk, it's constructive talk. But when you start talking about doing that work, there's a bit of an island too to some of that. And you have to be willing to operate from a place of being convicted in what you're doing so that you're doing it with the right motivation. And if you could add to that, I'm sure you probably have a few thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to reemphasize being informed.
Yeah.
There is a discipline to activism.
Yes.
And I think some people just think you just like tear off a piece of cardboard, write something on it, and go out and scream into the middle of the street. You can do that. You won't activate anybody, and you won't effectuate any change. It requires discipline. It requires being consistently informed, right? Because so many of the issues that we take on change over time. It requires having community, right? It requires that you are not the only one out there doing it. Now, I might see you being the only person I see currently kneeling, right? But that doesn't mean that you are not organizing with people behind the scenes, so that it's the second that you step off the field, y'all have figured out the talking points for when the microphone is in your face, because the microphone will be in your face, right? And if you get up there and you say something goofy, well, then the whole movement is ruined, right? You have to say something that is informed, that actually moves it forward. And if you've been in community with people who help you develop those talking points, then you can be prepared for that moment and things can continue from there. But it really does require the same kind of discipline that one brings to their athleticism, they have to bring to activism.
We have two up top. Go ahead, you first and you next. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Blake. I'm a student at the college studying economics. Y'all have discussed a lot about equal pay, which I think is really important. But the WNBA places conservative estimates at their revenue at about $60 million, while the NBA places estimates at about 100 times that for their revenue. So I guess my question is, what is pay parity, and is it equivalent pay, or is it something more relative?
You could come to my class and we'll answer that one.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's a challenging question and a difficult question. I also, to a point you made earlier, have to ask, what are the levers, right? And so if, for example, the advertisers right?
Right,
On
right,
these various games.
right.
How is pressure being exerted on them to provide space for more equity, right? Because if dollars are coming from them, then that's one of the levers I should be pulling to make sure that you're considering my WNBA games the same way you're considering my NBA games. And so I think what you're talking about is a real challenge. Like I said before, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to tackle it. And I do think that we have to be far more open about what the levers are. It's not just how many behinds are in the seats, right? We know that sports make money in lots of different ways, and we have to be looking at all of those and some ways we may not have even discovered yet to figure out how we create real equity.
Clark, did you want to add to that?
When you can't add to what's been said, silence is the best posture.
Go ahead, you're next, yes.
Yeah, hi, my name is Luke Albert. I'm a sophomore at the college. I think some of us might know about what's going on in the California state legislature, in which they're very much challenging the status quo of the NCAA. And so looking at it from even sort of a greater public social issue, how can we reframe the narrative around collegiate pay in the NCAA, around labor and civil rights?
That's the name, image, likeness legislation that we're talking about right at the beginning. Really good question.
Yeah. Very good question.
Prepared for that one?
Yeah. My position, when you talk about civil rights and labor rights, I draw a line between professionalizing the college athlete, and I draw a line with pain and tying that to professionalizing the athlete. So being an employer or employee flies in the face of my position on student athletes. The model is broken, it needs to be fixed. But looking at student athletes that are on scholarship as employees is not something that I endorse or support. Civil rights are universal. And the name, image, and likeness legislation is part of what I think can be an agent of change for the amateurism model. It might need to be broken and torn down completely, but in the interim, NIL, name, image, and likeness, is a way, I think, to provide another source of benefit and compensation for student athletes. How you get to that point is still to be determined, but I think that's a way and a road that we can go down in terms of improving the compensation and the benefits for scholarship student athletes. I do believe that's something that can be addressed fairly soon, and it could make a difference in terms of what the value of that scholarship looks like, and dividing some of that revenue pie that sometimes doesn't get to the student athletes in the way that it should.
What I will say is that we know that this issue goes beyond just pay, right? So I think about what would be known in employment spaces as workman's comp, right? If you are injured in the exercising of your athletic duties and you incur some kind of cost, right? What does the institution owe to you, given that they have benefited from that labor? What do they owe to you for you to be well? I think that those are, to your point, to your question about framing, right? I think it's important that we make sure that we're talking about more than just how many dollars am I putting in your pocket and what does your paycheck look like, because we know it is much, much, much more broad than that. The other thing that and to that point, even when it does come to the paycheck, I do think we have to consider the context of the young people that we are so often putting in this position, because so often, the folks with immense talent are coming from situations of extreme poverty, right? And I think that it is wrong to say that context doesn't matter. I think that we recognize that we place people in very difficult positions. The current NCAA rules place people in very difficult positions when they are literally making life or death choices. And I think that it is wrong for us to act like that context doesn't matter. To this question about likeness, here's what I will say. I have a few followers on Instagram. Even though I'm an activist, people think that I can sell things, right? So they're like, sell our flat tummy tea. And I'm like, no. But the few times that I have signed up to be an influencer for something, it's something that has to do with social good. It's never just a product. But I read that contract forwards and backwards, up and down, sideways and sideways. I then send it to my lawyer, who does the same thing. He sends it back to me with a bunch of red text, and I read it again. Because what I discover in all of these contracts is how long you plan on using my image, right? For what you plan on using my image. If you plan on putting my image on a billboard, the rate is different than if you just want to put it on Instagram, right? And if I do that, and I'm nobody's college or pro athlete, then everyone should be able to exercise that same amount of agency. That's just my opinion.
Excellent.
Great comments. Yes, up top. Yes.
Hi there. Thank you for coming. My name is Ryan Sears. I'm a sophomore at the college studying government. My question has to deal with the NFL and particularly Jay-Z's partnership with the NFL. I first would like to preface my comment that I think it's anyone's prerogative to do what they want with their own money, and their own weight that they have and power that they have in this world. But I guess my original question, and the foundation of my question, is when you are in a position of power, especially within communities that are typically underrepresented and typically targeted, as is Jay-Z, a leader in many different Black communities, is there an obligation or some sort of role towards using that position for unilateral good? And I think some may make the case that his partnership with NFL is moving the case forward, although some people will say otherwise. And so I guess I'd like to hear your opinions on that, and then also about his personal obligation towards social good.
I'll take this first. I think to be determined on where the needle goes from here as a result of this partnership. I know we're in a microwave age, and we're always ready to immediately come to outcomes and conclusions and to pontificate on what one should or shouldn't do or why he or she should or shouldn't do it. I would say you need to give that part of it time. As far as the responsibility, I think there's always greater responsibility with greater privilege, and individuals have to steward that as their conscience and convictions guide them. Clearly, you can be influenced by those who you allow to influence you, but ultimately, when you have position, influence, power, stature, access, then you have a responsibility, and I think we've touched on this earlier, you have a responsibility to use it for good or to steward it well. And then each individual has to determine to what degree he or she is going to wield or yield that influence. That can be frustrating if you have a different opinion as to what one should do. It can be angering, but the reality is it's not my race to run for Brittany. It's not hers to run for me. It's not ours to run for Jay-Z. So that's my position and take. Time will tell what this partnership ultimately does going forward. The responsibility grows as you have greater privilege and power and position, and each individual has to determine how they're going to use that.
I knew this.
Really
amen.
good answer. Thanks. Go ahead.
I knew this question was coming, and I was like, I'm sitting here trying to decide how much trouble I want to get in.
How much trouble do you want to get in?
I usually opt for all of it.
Do you?
And I've said this online before, as an organizing principle, I wish Jay-Z would have picked up the phone and called Colin Kaepernick. Because the NFL's not talking to anybody about social justice if Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed and lots of others are not kneeling, right? And so this is what I meant earlier about the discipline of building community and not going into a room by yourself. A woman named Mary Church Terrell, who is an activist and an educator from Washington, D.C., she helped found a lot of, at the time, Negro women's clubs around the country. And the ongoing theme was to lift as we climb, right? So you're just not supposed to be walking through these doors by yourself. And I know he's got a team and lots of folks. And so I'm not necessarily saying that this was what happened, but it sure looked like it. And so from an organizing principle, community matters, right? Having a team matters, not to be too on theme with the sports stuff, but having a team that trusts you and you trust them actually matters in these situations. The other thing is, we should never underestimate, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, the power of setting expectations. So we saw some of the fallout with the first set of donations that were given from this impact campaign, right? If you didn't see it, we saw one of the grantees, a club in Chicago that teaches young men boxing skills, where the white executive director of the organization was seen cutting off the dreadlocks of 2 black young men who were in the organization, and the commentary around it was like, oh, they're on their way to a better life, they look so cute, and all of the racial animus came out, right? Like, for a good reason, right? People were like, what is happening here, and exactly what just got funded, right? Because it wasn't just about the dreadlocks. It was about what mindsets do you have, and how are you impacting young people who deserve every opportunity in life. So as we watched the fallout from that, what occurred to me is that sometimes we underestimate our ability to set expectations. And this is what I meant about being informed earlier. If you had the right people informing the plan, they could have said, if we're going to give the money, here are the things that have to be met. If you don't meet these standards, then you don't get the money, right? So where are you on culturally responsive training for all of your staff if you're an organization that works with young people, right? What does your plan look like? Does your strategic plan involve community input, right? These are all of these little things that people who run nonprofits, people who are organizers, people who've been doing that work for a long time know instinctively. But sometimes if you don't operate in that world, you just don't know. So this is why you have to build a team, right? So that somebody can tell you, yeah, okay, cool, we're gonna go with the NFL, great, hundreds of thousands of dollars to give away. Here are the expectations we have to set, because we can set a new model of philanthropy if we do it this way, right? So sometimes when you just are moving full steam ahead and the only people around you are telling you what you wanna hear, then you end up making decisions that are well-intentioned. And to be clear, Jay has done a lot of stuff has been behind the scenes that we don't know about, that has really moved the needle, and some stuff in front of the scenes that has moved the needle. But this choice in particular, I sometimes just wonder, like, who is informing all of these choice points, and if there couldn't have been some better decisions made.
We have time for one more, and then maybe if we go over time, you guys can come up and ask questions individually, but you were next. Yes.
First I want to thank both of you for taking the time out. I think I can say on behalf of my team and everyone here that it's certainly been very insightful. I'm Seth Downs, also part of Harvard basketball, senior from Ohio.
The most important detail.
Columbus, Ohio. But for Mr. Kellogg, how relevant was the dialogue of like name, image, and likeness, or anything like on those grounds in your era of basketball, particularly in college? And then the second question, your NBA career was cut short because of injury. So what kind of led you to persevere after your career?
Great question.
Wow, that's an awesome question around the NIL, name, image, and likeness. Quite honestly and candidly, it wasn't even on the radar screen. I enrolled in college in 1979. I'm excited to be receiving a scholarship to attend Ohio State University to fulfill the dream of being the first of my immediate family to have a chance to get a college degree, to play basketball at the highest level, and to hopefully have a chance to realize the dream of being a pro. And to your point of setting expectations, that bar was really, you're getting your college education paid for.
So be grateful.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was a huge accomplishment and stepping stone. So that's really where my head was at the time, and that's obviously 40 years ago when I first went to Ohio State. So it wasn't even on the radar screen. I will tell you I had an interaction with the NCAA, though. I had a mentor in the insurance business, an Ohio State alum, who actually exposed me to the business of insurance, property and casualty insurance, because he had found out that I was interested in studying business. He's still a friend to this day. But the NCAA got wind of me going through the proper channels. I went and got my insurance license, took the test at 18, was sponsored by this mentor, and was ready to capitalize on my name and image through basketball by legally selling insurance during the summer. The NCAA came to campus and actually wanted to make sure that I wouldn't have special access to well-heeled alums in order to be able to capitalize on my visibility. So that was my first exposure, but again, it wasn't on my radar screen,
Right.
but I had an experience that is still relevant to this day because it ties into that. So I just share that just as information, FYI, and that's part of why the model has gotten better, but it still needs to be refined in a big way. To your point about having my career cut short early, that was difficult. I had dreamed of being a pro. I had an ascending career, entered the league at 21, and by the time I was 26, the basketball playing part was over. But faith is what sustained me in the transition.
Preach
My faith in God, knowing that I didn't know what my future held, but I knew who held my future through faith in Christ. So that was the foundation for me to continue to move forward in a positive way. It was hard. I shed tears. My wife and I both did. Basketball had been my life. I mean, it had provided me with so much of what I deemed to be good. And to have it cut short before I had exhausted what I thought would be a long career was difficult. But it was, in many ways, a tremendous blessing to move from being basketball-centric to God-centric. And from there, I've been able to continue to stay in the game and carve out a path. But that was really the foundation for me to step forward. I always thought basketball was a means to an end. I never really wanted to be fully defined by basketball. But it's hard not to be when it is what it is to you and you've kind of got it on the throne of your life. And it was actually repositioned through my encounter with God. So that's the foundation.
Is passing the collection plate against NCAA rules? I don't know.
No, we could probably pass it in here.
We want to thank our panelists so very much.
Absolute pleasure.
And
thank you.
As I said, if you have an individual question, please come forward, and thank you for your
need that
attention.
first quote.
It's a great panel. Thank you.
First quote?
Yeah, that first one.